South Africa has resumed work on one of its COVID-19 vaccine trials that was put on hold a week ago. The Ox1Cov-19 Vaccine Trial, or the Oxford Trial as it's commonly known, aims to find a vaccine that will prevent infection of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Wits University is collaborating with the University of Oxford and the Oxford Jenner Institute on the South African trial. Last Tuesday, the Oxford trials were paused at all its research sites, including South Africa, to investigate whether the adverse reaction of a UK participant was linked to the vaccine. The trials have since resumed, and South Africa has already recruited more than 1,800 participants. Well, not all countries taking part in the trials have resumed at this stage. One such is the United States, citing concerns. South Africa, though, has resumed, and to understand why some have resumed and others remain on the sidelines, we've asked health expert and Vice President for Research at the South African Medical Research Council, Professor Jeffrey Mphahlele, to join us via Skype. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. Hello, Prof. Can you hear me loud and clear?
I can hear you loud and clear.
There you go.
I hope you can hear me.
Now we can hear you. All right, so take us through the rationale for some countries choosing not to go back on this trial. South Africa has satisfied itself. What does South Africa know that these other countries don't or are worried about?
Well, maybe let's put it this way. If you do a clinical trial, every country has got its own regulatory authorities, which will oversee the trial, including the ethics committees. So it is really up to these regulatory authorities and the national ethics committees to decide whether they want to continue with the trial or not. But we know that for UK and South Africa, they've decided to restart the clinical trials after the information that emerged that the rare side effect that was reported was not necessarily due to vaccination.
All right. And again, you know, with these blind studies, you can't give away too much, but some assurance, I suppose, needed to be given to be able to resume this trial.
Correct. So you need to give assurance. And one way of giving assurance is that any trial has got a number of oversight committees. We do have what we call data and monitoring safety board. And this is an important committee of the trial because it's able to assess whether a rare side effect or any side effect for that matter might be due to vaccine or not. And it will inform the study group if the trial needs to stop. So in this case, the investigation was done and it was found that the side effect is not necessarily, related to the vaccine.
So does that mean that we'll never know whether this person had the placebo or the actual vaccine?
At this stage, maybe not. I don't have the details of that because the trial is blinded. But it's safe to say that when you resume the trial, it means that the regulatory authority and the ethics committees are satisfied that the trial is not, or the side effect rather, is not really linked to the vaccine. So we are pretty...
Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are pretty sure that this side effect that was reported, which is a rare neurological disorder, is not quite related to the vaccination process. It could be just a chance event.
All right. So the United States, India, they have paused and they haven't come back online. And these are sizable countries, and so the trials would benefit with these being back online quite quickly. Does that play into the timeline for the final outcome of the study if they take their time to come back on?
Absolutely. So it will impact on how soon the study will be completed because the study is dependent on the recruitment of volunteers. If you have got other places where recruitment is stopped, obviously it will affect, the study.
How well are we doing in South Africa in terms of recruitment?
I beg your pardon?
I said, how well are we doing in South Africa in terms of recruitment?
For this particular trial, I think that South Africa has done very well because they are already done with the recruitment. You will recall that the aim was to recruit just over 2,000 volunteers, and they are almost there in terms of the recruitment.
All right. And so what's been happening to our South African participants? They get inoculated with something and people just watch. Again, this is all based on the idea that we still live in the virus and some of them might get it and the vaccine will work. Is that how it works?
Well, it's not quite like that. When you vaccinate anyone who is participating in a clinical trial, you don't just give the vaccine and then you let the person go for a long time without monitoring whether there are side effects or not. So all the volunteers are requested to report and to the study sites so that the study team is able to monitor whether there are any side effects or not, regardless of whether you received a vaccine or a placebo, because the study group doesn't know whether they are injecting the vaccine or a placebo. So they treat everybody equally, and they need to monitor them to ensure the safety of the participants, because safety is extremely important when you participate in a clinical trial.
All right, so that part makes sense, monitor their side effects and so on and so forth, but how will you know whether this vaccine works? Because you need at some point to assess whether somebody actually got the virus and it was dealt with.
Yes, this is the reason you have a placebo group and the experimental group that will receive the vaccine. And both groups are treated the same. And as I mentioned, that the study group does not know whether they are giving the participants a placebo or a vaccine. And after receiving, the injections, they allow the people to live their lives. And in the process, they will be exposed to the virus. And then those who get infected, obviously, they will report the infection. And eventually, they analyze the results and they compare the infections in the placebo versus the experimental group. So if you find that you have got more infections in the experimental group than the placebo, it means that the vaccine is not doing its job. Ideally, you should find less infections in the experimental group, or sometimes no infection at all, if the vaccine is really protecting against the infection.
So people are practicing social distancing, they're washing their hands, they're sanitizing and protecting themselves from the virus. It's quite possible that you'll end up with a very low sample of people who test positive. What might that do to analyzing the data?
Well, it shouldn't really affect the data as such. You should be able to analyze the data and still do the comparison.
Even though people are going out of the way not to get the virus, this is where I'm going with this. So if everybody, if all 1,800 people are taking care of themselves and they don't get the virus, what then?
Well, let's assume that all of them behave like that, right?
Yeah.
It means that they are behaving exactly the same. So the experimental group should still have less infection if the vaccine is working. But we know that in reality, it's not like that. Once the people have received the injection, they will go on, live their lives. The most important thing is that if they experience any symptoms, regardless of whether they think it's related to the injections, they should report that to the study group. That is the most important part, so that you are able to monitor safety.
All right, so these countries that have decided not to resume immediately, as you said, they've got their own regulatory authorities in those countries. One would think, though, that these authorities would talk to each other for the greater good, so that these trials, and this won't be the only one, there'll be many others, can go ahead quite quickly. These are extraordinary times.
Well, we hope they will be able to resolve their position and continue with the trial, but it's totally independent. No country and no volunteer can be forced to participate in a clinical trial until they feel that they are safe to participate. Even if this is just perceived safety, they just have to make sure that they tick all the boxes.
That you're satisfied that South Africans are not at risk as a result of what we've seen with this one participant, that there's no risk there. The only risk might be normal side effects that might develop, but nothing related to this individual.
Well, if there is any side effect or serious side effect that is similar to what is reported in the UK, we should have known because that should have been reported. I'm sure there are some minor side effects related to injection, and these are always generic. And you know, they are found in all clinical trials. As long as you are injecting something in the body, you will elicit some minor side effects, but they usually resolve without any complications.
All right, so far so good. We'll wait to see as these trials progress. I suppose this is a difficult question, but if all goes well, what sort of timeline are we looking at before they can say we have enough data and we're going to start production now?
Yeah, it is definitely a difficult question because what they need to do after phase 3 clinical trials is to analyze the data, is to show that there is efficacy against COVID-19, and they should be able to convince regulatory authorities to register the vaccine. Once the vaccine is registered, it can be made available to the public. But then there should be manufacturing processes that will take place, and this is not an overnight thing. It takes a while before you manufacture enough doses to supply the countries that will need the vaccines. And we must say that initially there's going to be limited supply of the vaccine because no manufacturer will be able to really generate doses that will supply nearly 8 billion people who are in the world currently.
All right. Professor Mphahlele, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for those insights. And let's keep praying that these scientists and these trials yield results sooner rather than later.
Thanks for having me.